Mr. Ian Calderon is a Democrat running for governor of California and a former state assembly majority leader. He was first elected in 2012 and the legislature's first millennial. He helped pass the film tax credit and launched the California's blockchain working group, and now he's campaigning on affordability issues. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Ian Calderon. To start us off, for those who don't know you, who is Ian Calderon and what led you to run for governor of California?
Yeah, so I had never been in public service before. I grew up around it. My dad, he was a longtime legislator, so I grew up learning the value of public service at a pretty early age. I'd go to events with him all the time, district events. When I was a baby, there was a lot of pictures of him holding me while he was giving his speeches. And so I loved it. I loved being able to see the impact that he was having and learn the value of what it actually meant to do something for somebody else's life other than your own, to do something positive for somebody else other than yourself. And just before, I think it was like 2010, I had decided I wanted to run for the state assembly. Never ran for anything before, and I ended up starting my campaign for the state assembly when I was 25 years old. I got elected just after turning 27. I won my primary by 330 votes. It was very close. I was running against a former legislator who represented a big part of the district that we were running for. But I raised $800,000. I, knocked on over 1,000 doors, and I ended up winning by that slim margin. I think it was because I just wanted it more, and I worked harder and outworked him. And everybody agreed that my message of just giving somebody young a chance was important, just to have a voice at the table and a perspective being represented. And then in 2016, I became the youngest majority leader in the history of the state of California. I just turned 30 years old, helped the speaker become the speaker. I became the majority leader, loved what I did, and worked on a lot of really big policies, a lot of things that are really important to me: financial literacy, tech literacy, arts education funding, film tax credit stuff, a little bit in the realms of homelessness, created the state legislative tech and innovation caucus, created the millennial caucus, was a member of the Latino caucus. My background is that I'm Mexican, Mexican Italian, yeah. But because I was young when I got elected, I ended up having a lot of my major life milestones. And what happened when I was in office? I got married. Well, I got engaged. Then I got married, and then I had three of my four kids. My kids are 8, 7, 5, and 4 now. And as much as I loved what I did, everybody kept telling me I was at the height of my power and influence. I decided to leave 4 years on the table. I could have served for 4 more years. But power was never the thing that meant most to me, even though I could have used that to go to Congress, run statewide. I went back to raise my family with my wife. And so I've been able to take my kids to school over the last couple of years, pick them up from school. I've been a small business owner, doing state and local government affairs, still staying involved, staying engaged, working on some big policies for clients, and then continuing to be relationship development type person, maintain the relationships that I had when I was in the legislature. And when I look at the state of not just California politics, but national politics, people are looking for something new. They're looking for something different. They're looking for youth. They're looking for a next generation of leadership, something that I believe that I was very well suited for. I had done that before anybody else in this state, because I was the first of my generation as a millennial ever elected to the state legislature. And I just thought that this is something that California is going to want. This is what they're going to need. I had power. I gave up that power. I'm running because I want to know that my family, my kids have a future in this state. We can create pathways to home ownership. I think it's wrong that the average age of the first time home buyer is 40 years old. It's wrong that the median priced home in California is $800,000, twice the national average. You got to make over $235,000 in order to afford that median priced home. It's wrong that we have to compete against corporate and foreign interests that are buying our homes for speculative reasons. They own 1 in 5 homes, 20%. And that accounts for 1.45 million homes. And when we have a hole of needing 3 million homes, that's half of the problem right there. And so I just think that there are a lot of things that we've overcomplicated. That's why it's become difficult to own a home, and we've taken away that pathway to home ownership for so many generations, being able to save for a down payment. I think it's wrong that we've created this affordability crisis around utilities, around gas, around childcare, around everyday costs and everyday things. And I think it's wrong that there's no accountability at the state level. Nobody wants to initiate the forensic audits. Nobody wants to take ownership, and nobody wants to take accountability for the inefficiencies and ineffectiveness of state government. That just because we do something doesn't mean it's the best thing in the world. No, progressive government means continuing to try and do things new and do things differently. And when you figure out that something doesn't work, you learn from it, you pivot, and then you lean into what does work. And so that's the type of leadership I think that Californians are expecting. That's the type of leadership I think Californians need and deserve. And everything that's the most important thing in the world to me is tied to this next governor and the future of this state. And so if I was going to trust anybody's future, or my kid's future in anybody's hands, why not it be me? So I have the right experience, and I believe I'm the right candidate at the right time.
Yep. Thank you. I mean, your resume and all the, I mean, becoming the youngest state leader is like very impressive, and I feel like you're sort of like a role model for a lot of youth in politics. Um,
Thank you.
Moving on to more of the governor race. I mean, it's a stacked field of many talented Democrats. What is one thing that distinguishes your candidacy from others?
Well, I mean, I think I talked a little bit about it in terms of having power or giving that power up, and not just kind of being in this hamster wheel of, well, I ran for local office, then state office, now federal office, now the governor, and so on and so forth. I think a lot of the challenges that we face in the state is because we have leaders that are just focused on internet hype, and they're focused on what's next. And when my family's future, my own kids' future, all of our future is in the hands of who this next governor is going to be. I don't want that to be their priority. I don't want that to be the thing that they care most about and they focus most on. And so I had power. I gave up that power to be in with my family and raise my kids. That's major differentiating factor between me and anybody else. I've been very vocal that once I'm done being governor, I don't want to do anything else. I want to go back to being my family. My kids will be in high school at that time, and I will have missed enough baseball games and dance recitals and things with my kids that I don't want to miss. And which is the reason why I left the legislature in the first place. And so when I say I'm gonna leave and go back to being with them, you can believe me and you could trust that because I've already done that. I've already proven it. And I am the only candidate for governor who's ready to do the job on day one. I'm the only one that has any recent relative legislative leadership experience. I've been able to negotiate major policies that have been significantly impactful to the state over the last decade. I've been negotiating the budget. I've wrangled all the votes that need to get done to get the priorities of the legislature passed with both a majority vote and a two-thirds vote. I'm the only one with that that recent legislative experience, and I'm the only one that's had the closest proximity to the governor's office and the responsibility of the governor and all the different pieces of how to be successful as a governor, not just the legislative piece, because I think I shine there. That's where I feel most confident and comfortable because I ran the lower house alongside the speaker. But also at the same time, understanding how important state level appointments are, understanding how important it is to not just have one size fits all policies that are supposed to be equally distributed or impactful to each region, because that's not the way that it actually works. We have to have regionalized pots of money, regionalized policies that account for the intricacies and the specific, minute circumstances of each community across the state. I understand it. I've been around it. I get it. And I've got the energy to work on this day in and day out because I know that my time will be limited. 8 years sounds like a long time, but it's not when it comes to government and getting things done. And so I just believe that I am the most prepared, specifically on governance, day one, to do it. And I believe that I'm the one that most people are looking for. They're just sick and tired of the same playbook, and that always continuing to be the thing that we're pulling from. And they want new, they want different. People want to feel that Obama hope again.
Yep, thank you for the answer. Sort of tying into that question, could you share one concrete policy area where your approach might differ from a fellow Democratic opponent, and why do you think it would work better?
A specific policy that I would differ from an existing Democratic. Is that what you said?
Yeah,
Policy?
yeah, policy, yeah.
Um, I
Or
mean, I
policy
think
area, yeah.
I feel like there's a lot. I think what I would start with is I would start with childcare. Everybody's going to talk about childcare. First, I'm living it right now. I'm in it. I've got kids, or a kid, one more kid. that is still in daycare right now. I had all four kids in daycare at one point in time, and I was paying more for daycare, like way more for daycare than I was in on my rent. And so I'm living in it. And I think what's frustrating for me is that we go out and we have these debates or these forums or these discussions, and everybody can say all these really pretty nice things. And I can say whatever I want when I'm campaigning. I'm going to give you free this. I'm going to give you free that. I'm going to open up the world. But there is a big difference between campaigning and actual governance. And when I say, so where I think it is specifically on childcare is that I say, I'm going to cap childcare costs at $500 a month for every single, almost nearly every single child in this state. It will cover 95% of the kids 0 through 5, which is 95% of the families that have kids 0 through 5, that I can cap the childcare cost at $500 a month. And that's a real, actual policy that I could get done on day one in my first budget by pulling all the money that we already spend, along with allocating another $4 or $5 billion that I would pull from other pots of money to stick into creating basically universal affordable childcare across the spectrum. And you would still have ranges where people that are getting free childcare would continue to get that free childcare. And then based on your income, it would increase, but it would cap out at $500,000. So if somebody's making $200,000, they're still paying only $500 a month tops for their childcare. Childcare is infrastructure. I know this. I could not work without childcare. I couldn't do what I do. My wife couldn't do what she does. It is so important, and it is so unfair to expect families to have to pay for their child to be taken care of in a safe environment all day while still having the responsibility of needing to go to work, and the challenges that provides, because it's like, oh, we'll just have family members do it. We didn't have family member help. We didn't live next to any family to have that type of help. So it was either, so one of us doesn't work, or put him in childcare and stretch the budget as much as he possibly can. And that's just not a fair position. I think a major failure of our society, and I'm not just talking about California, I'm talking about in America, is that we've prioritized the job. We have not prioritized the family. We don't have family paid leave that's representative or consistent with what other countries are doing. It is important for parents to be around their kids at an early age. We want to create, good performing, productive members of society. Will keep the parents with them longer at birth, and let them build those bonds, and that safety and everything that comes along with more time. So I actually have a plan that is realistic. Everybody's gonna say, "Oh, I'm going to create universal free childcare." Okay, that sounds nice, but now you got to do it. Once you get elected, how are you going to do it? Well, my plan, I know I can do.
Yeah. Why do you think childcare is so expensive in California right now?
Because so much of it is done private. There's so much of it is done because where there's a lack of it, there's a lack of availability, and so in order to get in, you got to pay more to take up one of those spots. Because there were lots of times when we were looking for a place for our kids to go, and it's just like, sorry, we don't have any capacity, we don't have the ability. And for me, having multiple kids, it was really difficult because we didn't want our kids in different places. You wanted them all in the same spot. And so you have capacity issues, and then you've just got the cost. There are significant costs with providing, the resources to comply with regulations, to be able to build the facility, run the facility, pay for the staff of the facility, with everything that goes along with hiring people and having labor costs. And so if the state takes that on, the state takes on building childcare facilities on state-owned property, creates more access, and can create better wages for workers, that's managed through the state. The overall cost of administering that care can go down over time, but it does take investment from the state budget, and we just don't prioritize it enough to fund it enough. I mean, it's good that the state is providing universal not pre-K, TK. So I like my kids go to our elementary school once they reach TK, and that's covered and that's free, and that's great. But not every, I mean, that there is an unlimited capacity, and that doesn't solve the issue for kids that are 0 to 4 and can't, or 0 to 3, 0 to 4 range that can't get into that TK program.
Yep. Thank you for your answer. I think it's great that you're passionate about such an important aspect of like family life in general.
Thanks.
Yeah, moving on to sort of other Democratic policies. You've described yourself as a Democrat who doesn't take marching orders from the party. Can you name like another specific Democratic policy in the state that you believed has failed and how would you change it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a couple here. I mean, I guess what I would do is I wouldn't say that it's failed. Um, and I wouldn't like homelessness is close to failure. I think environmental justice hasn't been a failure, but it has created other significant challenges, especially for communities of color and low-income communities. And so, like, just taking that for example, we talked a lot about environmental justice, how important it was to create environmental justice across communities, across the state. I'm a surfer. I grew up surfing. I was a sponsored athlete. I care a lot about the environment. I care a lot about the ocean. I care a lot about our ecosystem. I know how important it is. I am an environmentalist. But at the same time, a lot of those policies were pushed by people that can afford the increased costs that come along with having more environmental friendly policies. And so when you go into black and brown communities here in LA or up and down the state, there is a significant amount of economic injustice that has occurred as a result of a lot of these policies. And so, for example, we're pushing electrification. We want to have electric vehicles that are populating our streets. We don't want to have gas-powered vehicles. Gavin Newsom signs, his ending gas-powered vehicles ban by 2035, and that's all well and good. But my district was 70% Latino, 11% API. A lot of day workers, and they need and they drive their early 2000s F-150 in order to get their equipment. These are day laborers. That's how they move their equipment. What are they going to do? Go buy $100,000 Rivian? Give me a break. They can't afford that. They can't afford that. And when I try to say, okay, you really care about poor people and poor communities and making people actually able to buy into this electrification and this new environmental way. Okay, great. Well, then rather than just offering tax credits to rich people that do not need the tax credits, why don't we offer them to people that we need actual buy-in from, which are the folks that are from lower income communities that can only buy an electric vehicle that's secondhand, a used vehicle. No, Democrats didn't want to have that conversation. That wasn't important enough. Even the governor right now says $200 million to go to rebates for the purchase of electric vehicles. Imagine if we had $200 million we could put back into healthcare, because that's a significant cost right now, or just offsetting some of the policies, environmental policies at an increased cost for our communities of color. And so I want common sense. I want a clean environment, but we have to have policies that are putting people at the center of it, because what happens and where the failure is of understanding people in general is that if I can afford my life, I feel confident and comfortable to take care of myself and take care of my kids and live comfortably. Let's talk about the environment. Let's talk about social justice issues and cultural issues and things that are important, to us, where we can make it a more equal and fair world. But if I'm struggling, I can't afford to support myself. I can't afford to provide for my family. I don't want to talk about the environment. I don't want to talk about LGBTQ plus issues. I don't want to talk about anything else other than solving for my challenge right now, because I am struggling to live, and I'm literally a utility bill increase or price increase away from getting kicked out of my house and not being able to afford rent, because I'm already paying 60 or 70% of my monthly income in rent. It's literally that tight. And so I think a failure is being able to understand the real effect of these policies on the ground and for real everyday people. And the government has to be more responsive and more tuned into what those impacts are if we're going to have a successful state long term where people actually feel like they have a future here. And I feel like a major failure isn't just on a specific policy. It is on the way that Sacramento gets in its bubble and thinks they have all the answers to all the problems, and hears from the same small groups of people and makes their decisions based on what they're saying, and often is very, very far removed from what the actual impact is on the ground.
Yep. Thank you for your answers. Very clear. And I mean, Californians really appreciate the change you're trying to make with affordability, as it's by far the single the biggest problem in California right now. Moving on to my last question before I pass it on to Kira. What's one state agency you think is underperforming, and what specific performance indicator would you publish to prove improvement of the agency?
I mean, I think a lot of state agencies are underperforming because there's a lack of accountability and there's a lack of performance metrics and expectations that have been put in place, and in the accountability that holds them to those standards that are supposed to be set by the governor. But take EDD, for example. Yeah, the Employment Development Department, is responsible for disability payments. It's responsible for unemployment payments. That is an extremely inefficiently run organization. And what's difficult is that it's really inefficient and ineffective because of the lack of technology implementation and its inability to just adapt to the times and use the tools of the times to be able to provide better services, which in return is really putting undue stress and to state workers and putting them in a real lose-lose situation. I see technology as something that's supposed to supplement and enhance how people can work and reasonably solve the challenges of whatever their day-to-day responsibilities are, not supplement. And I think their inability to implement technology has been extremely damaging to the credibility of the state and and people's perception of our ability to deliver services. Back in 2017, I created the blockchain working group, which you talked about. And the blockchain working group was just looking at blockchain technology and how we can use it to modernize how state government does business and how we can be more efficient, more effective at doing it. And I back then said we need to institute a blockchain-based system for all state payments. All state payments. We need transparency so people can see that the money is going to where it's supposed to be going, where we said it was going to be going, and that everybody receiving that money has been KYC'd, know your customer, so that we feel confident that that's exactly who those dollars are supposed to be going to. And the state didn't listen to me. And during COVID, we lost $22+ billion to fraud. And so, imagine what we could have used that $22 billion for and how many lives and how many people we could have helped. So I think that those are that is a specific example. And then, in terms of actually holding their feet to the fire, and what I would do is I would have regular forensic audits. I would have somebody appointed in my office to not only review different regulations, state regulations across the board, but somebody specific to do regular audits or strengthening the office of the independent auditor, state auditor, to do regular audits so we know that the money's supposed to be going, implement blockchain technology so we know who's approving it, and I have clear metrics put in place so that I am holding agency heads accountable to the expectations that they're supposed to be responsible with this money and that they are the ones, the buck stops with them. And if there is fraud and there are inefficiencies and ineffectiveness, I'm being clear on how I want you to solve and how I want you to approach it. And if you don't do it, then it's, then it is implementing policies to help them be able to achieve what it is that their goals are, or pivoting and putting someone else in that position.
Yep. Thank you. I mean, it's a clear plan, and you're very passionate about the topic. So I'm going to pass it on to Kira, who's going to lead the next part of the thing. But thank you so much for the first few points you've made so far.
Thank you for the questions.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you so much for coming here today. My name is Akira, and I loved hearing about how your personal experiences have really influenced your campaign. And I think it's really important that, people who are leading our California really understand what's happening on the ground, right? I mean, you said that you had a small business and you have a family, and that's really important. And thank you so much for talking about those experiences. But I wanted to talk about kind of a major issue that your campaign has been trying to solve, which is housing, right? So I wanted to ask, what's a single most impactful step that you think taking in the first year of being a governor would be meaningful to boost supply?
Well, I mean, I think the single greatest policy would be declaring a state of emergency on housing.
Right.
When I got elected, the housing was in crisis. That was back in 2012. Here we are in 2026. We still have a housing crisis. And so I think we need to finally declare a state of emergency and put in place emergency regulations that jumpstart housing development, new housing development, first-time home buyer, entry-level homes, so people can actually have something to buy. And when you increase that supply, prices go down. You put in specific metrics to limit the amount of time on permitting, limit the amount of time on costs. But then not just only relying on the state of emergency. As we're going through the state of emergency and we have these implemented policies that are specific to the state of emergency, we figure out these are the things that work the best, codifying them in law so that they are then now in policy long term, and we are changing how we actually approach these issues in the state long term so that we don't end up right back in this situation. Because if state of emergency is temporary, you have to have actual policy that provides those long-term codifications in law that allow those policies that work to allow us to be successful long term. And then, something that I've been working on for over a decade is just corporate and, foreign speculative interest buying up all our homes. I want to charge them fees so that we can use the money that we generate to provide refundable tax credit to every renter in the state so they can save up to $1,200. You don't have to have something to write off, like a write-off in order to get that tax credit. You get it no matter what. I want first-time home buyers to finally benefit from Proposition 13. No more should we have to not benefit from it, or it be a policy implemented at our expense. I will make that work for first-time home buyers by extending those protections to first-time home buyers. Existing homeowners, we need to make sure existing homeowners actually can stay in their homes. We have a property tax exemption in California that is $7,000. It's been $7,000 since 1978. If it had accounted for inflation and raised with inflation, that would be $70,000 a day per household. And so we need to increase that to $70,000, and the money that we'd raise from charging those fees, not just upfront ongoing fees, upfront fees, but annual ongoing fees to generate that revenue to cover the cost of that. And it would raise about $15 billion annually to cover all the things that I just talked about.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think like declaring a state of emergency, I'm not sure I've heard that before, and so that's really interesting. And I think that protecting, these homeowners that are really struggling in this current state of inflation is so important. And I wanted to kind of shift to the significant costs that each family is really feeling on the daily. And so you say that you'd veto laws that increase gas costs and restore energy independence. So what does that mean in practice in California on refining taxes and regulations?
I mean, there's a lot there. What I would say is I believe we pay too much in taxes. And don't get me wrong, I am a Democrat, and I don't mind paying taxes to pay for our roads, our infrastructure, our schools, everything else. I think the reason why I'm a Democrat is because I believe that whether I know you or not, you being successful in your life and you being able to support yourself and to support your family in turn makes California a better place for me to live. I think we all are dependent on each other. We all need to worry about each other and care and contribute to lifting each other up when we're going through significant times of need. And that's what I think the government should be for. It should be for a referee to keep it so that everyone has an equal shot at creating a successful life for themselves, but then to be there to pick you up and get you back on your feet when you're down and out. And so, I think we pay a lot in taxes. What I would like to do is, we say we're the fourth largest economy in the world. Well, that doesn't mean anything if nobody can afford to live here. And I don't think that the success of a state is measured by the size of its economy or the brilliance of its technology. I think it is measured by whether or not it's livable or not. Can you live here? And if you can afford a home, you can support yourself, afford childcare, be able to take your kids to go see a movie every once in a while, do some fun stuff. That is a successful state. Educate your kids to be relevant in this workforce. We continue to drive industries here because we have the workforce that these industries need. If that workforce can't afford to live here, then they're going to leave, and so will the jobs. The jobs, especially in tech, can go anywhere. They can be in any state. The reason why they're here is because we do have that workforce. And so I think it's finding ways to invest our money in smart programs long term that yield a return on investment that I believe needs to supplant the amount of money we get from the federal government. I think the federal government is extremely hostile. I think it's filled with Democrats and Republicans that are only interested in themselves and their own politics. We can't continue to rely on them. So my goal would be to create programs and invest in programs that would yield enough money to equal the amount of money we get annually from the federal government, lessening our dependence on them. And then when I say that I would veto legislation that would increase costs, what that really means is you need to work with the legislature. You have to lean in on policy while it's being crafted. The governor cannot sit back and just wait for it to get to him or her and decide, well, I'm going to veto it or I'm going to sign it. And this governor has very much had the approach of legislature, you do your job, and when it's time for me to do my job, I'll do mine. And that's not the right approach. You need to be involved. Be clear, this is what I think is right, this is what I think is wrong. And if the legislature chooses to still send something that's wrong, that is going to increase costs and is clearly going to increase costs, you veto it and you say, no, we need to go back to the drawing board and I will work with you until we can get this done. So understanding that process, understanding the amount of influence a governor has and how that governor chooses to implement that influence. And the price of gas, we're going to continue to be dependent on it for a long time. We're not going to have a total electrification for quite a while. And that doesn't mean I'm going to stand in the way of electrification, but I do think that the market to a degree needs to dictate and decide that. So if we've invested enough in the infrastructure to create more relevance and it easier to jump into these electric vehicles, then ultimately may the best technology win. But until we get to that point, we have to have more in-state refining. And when we have, when we're importing the majority of our crude, even if it's being refined here, those crude prices, it's volatile. They fluctuate a lot, and that can create really steep price increases, which you're seeing now because of the instability of what's happening in the Middle East. And so I just want us to be more energy independent. I think it's extremely important. I don't want to rely on anybody. I don't want to rely on the federal government. I think that we should have more regional cooperation with other states so that, from an energy perspective, both gas and utilities and electricity, we're working among states and we're sharing power and making money off it when we have excess, and then being able to buy it cheaply in order to get it when we need it. I guess that's how I would solve it and account for those challenges.
Thank you so much. That definitely makes sense for affordability. And I really love the idea that we really need to create like systems so that the everyday Californian can succeed if they tried, right? And on protecting those families, your platform says public safety should be the most important responsibility, which I totally agreed with. And I wanted to ask, what does success look like for, I guess, lower violent crime, property crimes, and overdoses? And what kind of trade-offs are you willing to take? Are you willing to make to kind of make this success happen?
Yeah, we're in politics, and so often what drives politics is perception. And this is going to sound like an interesting answer, but I'll get into why it is my answer. The greatest measure of success is going to be public perception. Does the public perceive themselves to be safe in their communities, perceive themselves to be safe in their homes? I can't tell you how many times my wife has sent me, an Instagram video or meme of, a mom going out with her children and, somebody trying to yank the kids away or kidnap the mom and put them into, oh my God, why am I blanking on this? Put them into, why am I blanking on what this is called? A sex slave, going into, becoming a victim of that, and being kidnapped. So if people feel safe and their perception in their communities and their homes that they're safe, that is an extremely important and I think strong metric to verify whether or not policies are working or not. I served under Jerry Brown. Jerry Brown was one of the guys who pushed criminal justice reform extremely hard. And I understood why he was doing it. You can't just continue to have the same policies that are going to be, relevant after decades. So you have to be able to modernize. That's what I talk about. That's what it takes to be a progressive government, is trying things even if they don't work, but pivoting from them and not leaning into the things that don't work just because you don't want to admit that you were wrong. And so, one of the things that I think the state failed on, though, was the lack of resources put into rehabilitation. Like, how are we really rehabilitating people and providing access to resources that they need to get themselves detoxed off of drugs and in a situation where they can be successful and have access to resources that helps them get on their feet and into the job market and ultimately self-sustain and on their own. Mental health services. And so I think it is a combination of all those things that is going to be necessary in terms of the metrics that are going to decide whether or not the safety and how our programs being implemented are successful or not. But the greatest metric is always going to be public perception, because I've seen this time and time again. You can put up all the data in the world that says, see, violent crimes are going down and overall crime is dropping, but people don't feel that. And if they don't feel that, then they're going to vote in a way that allows them to feel confident that whoever they're supporting is going to help them feel more safe in their homes and in their communities. And so you can't just shove this data down their throat and say, see, you're safe. No, they actually have to feel it.
Mm. That is such an amazing idea. I definitely think that, for wow, I love that. I love that idea. Okay, so public perception as the forefront of success. Definitely. And, some safety issues tie into, government balance, right? So there is growing criticism that the state is run by and for the unions, often at the expense of, I guess, like private sector efficiency and the common man's interest, I guess. And so what are your thoughts on this matter?
Well, I mean, when you talk about the common man, unions represent the common man. Unions represent low-wage workers.
Right.
They represent people that are working hard but feel like their voices and their contributions are undervalued by the businesses and corporations that they work for. And so, it's easy for a corporation to say, oh, well, see, this union, they unionize, they're asking for higher wages, they're asking for more benefits, and therefore it's causing our prices to go up, our costs to go up, so therefore your costs are going to go up. And, it does play out like that, and they do pass those costs along. And I think that there has to be a better way of creating more symbiosis, more of a symbiotic relationship between labor and corporations. Because take example the building trades and the oil industry. The oil industry is completely unionized, and the building trades are the ones that carry a lot of the water on the major policies in Sacramento for the oil refiners and the oil industry. And it is smart. Same thing for the entertainment industry, heavily unionized. And so when you need to increase the film tax credit, who's knocking on your door? The big studio? Nope. It's a union saying, hey, we're workers and we don't want to have to leave our homes for 3 or 4 months in order to get work. So please increase the film tax credit legislation or lift the cap so that we can stay home and actually be with our families while we work. And so, I think that, there are at times where those relationships can become very strained, and it can cause prices to increase. But you have to remember that a lot of the policies that are being pushed by labor unions are policies that are meant to benefit those that have the smallest voices. They don't have $1 million to hire somebody go and lobby the legislature. They have their union and the dues that they pay for it. And so um, that doesn't mean that unions should get whatever they want whenever they want. Unions certainly abuse the process where they want the legislature to codify in law things that need to be collectively bargained in their contracts. They come to the legislature often to try to gain leverage in those negotiation tactics, and it's become successful for them at times in putting in pressure to try to get a better contract with different organizations or corporations that they're negotiating with and against. But it's about creating affordability. It's about creating circumstances where people across the board can be successful. But the way I'm going to end this is it is ultimately the state's fault why these members and these unions and these businesses are having these issues because of the affordability crisis. If I'm a union and I say, oh, I want a 3% increase in my pay. Well, if the cost of living, which it does, increases 3 to 5% every single year, in order to just make sure your dollar goes as far next year as it did this year, you have to receive a 3 to 5% cost of living increase in your salary. And that's even if you get a 5% increase, you're not getting ahead. Your dollar's not going any further. It's just holding pace with the cost of living increases. So that's why affordability is such a huge topic, is that if we reduce the cost of housing, the cost of rent, if we reduce, allow people to build generational wealth through home ownership, reduce the cost of gas, reduce the cost of childcare, reduce the cost of living, that is how you relieve pressure that these interactions between unions and corporations have. And so it isn't so much about unions having control or power. Their job is to advocate on behalf of their workers and their members, and their workers and their members are struggling to live in the state. And so the state needs to work on lowering the costs so that they're not constantly going to the employer saying, hey, I can't afford my life anymore. I need a raise, because they're not wrong. And, corporations, they do hoard money, and, with different tax loopholes and tax advantages that they can that they could take advantage of, they do have more money than they always let on to have. There are thinner margins depending on the industry, but If the state focuses on lowering the cost of living while also at the same time reducing the amount of unnecessary, no longer relevant regulations, which is what I would focus a lot of time and energy on, you're reducing costs here, which makes the labor cost less impactful because you're saving here to supplement the increase over here, which people still need, and we need to prioritize the person, not the process or the bureaucracy.
Right. Absolutely. That's a very balanced take. Thank you. And so as a final question, what's like a policy position that you've like changed your mind on since leaving the office? And why did you change your opinion on that?
You know, I did change my mind on certain public safety measures when it comes to, um, public injection sites and needle exchanges. I understood at the time, I was always very hesitant, um, and not often very supportive of those types of policies. I think I understood the needle exchange program more than I did the public injection insights, but I just don't see that that's something that's been successful. The idea that the state is saying, well, you're going to shoot up, so just might as well do it so you don't get sick. I think that that's good because long term you can decrease costs, especially healthcare costs, because when somebody goes in the hospital and they've got a problem, they need to receive those services, and those costs ends up getting borne by the system, which we all pay for. Um, but I think there just needs to be a little more stricter policy around what we allow. We should not be allowing people to openly use drugs on our streets. We should not be allowing people access to the tools that they need in order to use those drugs. Um, and one I will say, which is a little more controversial, but I mean, my opinion has changed a little bit more since my time in the legislature. Is I believe everybody deserves equal rights. I'm very adamant about that. That is something that is extremely, extremely important to me. But I do think that there are interesting conversations around trans athletes in sports, and this idea of equity and fairness, and whether or not that is fair or not. And um, until I see something definitive that says that there is no competitive advantage of a trans woman competing against a natural born biological woman, I think that that's something that the state should not continue to be supportive of until we have more information to prove much more beyond a reasonable doubt that there isn't that advantage. And so, I think that California, and I do tend to agree with Governor Newsom on this, needs to be a little more culturally aligned with where people are at. I have daughters. They work really hard at the sports that they're playing. But just even flag football, my 8-year-old daughter plays flag football, and the difference watching my daughter and her friends play flag football between the boys that are at the same age, um, that would concern me as a parent. And I would hate for my daughter, to feel like they're not good enough as a result of that. Now, it's such a low prevalence and something that's not that common, um, which I think has been the attention that has gotten has been undeserving. And I think that we also need to remember that these are kids and they are trying to do the one thing that's probably the most American thing that they could do, which is play a sport. And there needs to be a place for everybody to be able to live the life that they want to live. But we also have to be fair, and the state needs to be very certain before they allow certain things.
Right. Thank you so much. Actually, that was my last question. So I'll just pass it back to Athan now. So.
Well, thank you for your time, Mr. Calderon. I'm gonna ask our President Kayvon if he has any questions, and otherwise, thank you for your time, and we'll wrap up then.
Yeah, so I guess I just have one question. It seems like, among the Democratic candidates in this governor's race, you seem to be leaning more business friendly. And so I'm wondering, how does what does being business friendly kind of mean in practice as a public servant?
I mean, I think it's important for context is that when I was in the legislature, I was 100% labor vote. I voted with labor unions 100% of the time. And so, one of the things that I've been very sensitive to is this idea that I would define myself as left, center, right. My voting record does speak for itself, and it is a pretty progressive voting record. But I'm focused on common sense and I'm focused on what is necessary given the need of the times right now. And I think that, we really have leaned, I mean, during our tenure and our leadership in the legislature, that was the most progressive legislature, I think, in the history of the state. With the policies that we've passed, that we worked on, on LGBTQ plus rights, on environment, worker protections across the board. Um, but, you know, I think that just given the need and the challenges that we face right now, we have to be realistic about what is going to actually lower costs, what is actually going to allow us to build more housing, what is actually going to lower the cost of gas, actually provide affordable childcare, accountability. This is something that I think is so, so crucial for this next governor. There is, look, my generation, we started this, and I think you guys feel the same. We don't have trust in civic institutions anymore because it's become very clear that their interest is in themselves. It is in protecting themselves, growing their influence, and not focused on us. If something good happens to us, it's like, well, that was the accident. That wasn't the goal. The goal was whatever your need was in the immediate moment. But the fact that it did something good for me, that wasn't really the goal. And so the government has to rebuild trust. And California is going to have a very, very difficult future if we start driving industries out of this state. If we start, becoming the state, where it's no longer possible to build housing, where it's no longer possible to build a business, no longer possible to meet the extensive regulatory requirements to just do anything in the state. And so we have to be aware of that. We have to do something about that. And we need to just streamline government. And I know that sounds more like a more moderate talking point, but Democrats have always been more common sense. They've always been the ones that more focused on, well, how do we just settle for the need and actually help the little guy? Well, you're not going to help the little guy by putting all these unnecessary regulations in place that drive up their costs, that drive up their cost of living, that make it difficult for them to stay in the state, that go and get an education, take on all this debt, and then now they've got to pay debt. They're paying $500 a month once they get a job, and their rent is 60% now of their rent monthly income. And so it's too much. It's just too much. And so, I'm not I'm not an absolutist. I am somebody who is willing to just look at the problems for what they are and use my experience and the people that I'm going to have around me to try to create the easiest path, the most direct path to success, and having the courage to stand up and stand in front of all the different people that may not understand it at the time as to why it's important to do that.
I totally agree. I feel like that situational approach is definitely what's needed right now.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so I guess we'll wrap up then. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Calderon. I found this conversation really insightful, and I'm sure both voters and fellows would find it as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, guys. I appreciate it. And I don't know if you have more interviews with other candidates, but good luck and reach out anytime.
Yep, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so
Take care.